Hi, I'm Sarasota author and editor Liz Corson, host of Manatee Educational Television's Suncoast Authors TV. At Suncoast Authors TV, we bring in award-winning authors who possess practical knowledge about the nuts and bolts of authorship, writing, editing, book design, and marketing. With me today is professional cellist, New York Times crossword composer, and first-time novelist Lucia Barrett, author of I'll Be Looking at the Moon. Lucia, it's great to have you here today.
Thank you for inviting me, Liz.
You are so welcome. I wanted to start by having you sketch out a little bit about your book, the book itself, the themes, the characters, the inspiration, and then I wanted to roll into the editing process. But I would like to start with your book.
Sure.
Tell us about your book.
It's called I'll Be Looking at the Moon, and it's a story that I had in mind for a long time. I started it in 1994, and it took me 5 years to complete it.
Wow.
And then another 10 years, actually, to get it published.
Was there a moment that you can look back and you thought to yourself, I'm going to write this book and it's going to be about these people?
It came to me. I don't know where the story came from, but it was there, and it just kind of spilled out onto the pages.
Over a long time.
Yes, but it was always there from beginning to end. It just told me what it wanted to be about. I can't describe it. I think other authors have felt that too. But it's basically it's an intriguing love story, but it's much more than that, because the book talks about 4 generations of a wealthy New England family and their bizarre, dysfunctional, and even deadly relationships. Elizabeth Morgan is the main character. She was born into this family in 1950, and we follow her through her painful childhood, through boarding school, college in Boston, and finally her dream job in France. And it's there in France that she meets the handsome Antonio, who is an expat from Italy. He's an extraordinary man. And theirs is a wonderful, wonderful relationship, very passionate, deep intimacy, a forever kind of love. They sail around the Mediterranean, where he lives in Nice on his yacht. And things are wonderful until they aren't. A disastrous event, including extortion, gambling, arson, causes them to break apart. And Elizabeth returns to the United States, and leaving Antonio behind, who is desperate to explain to her what happened. And for 15 years, she remains hidden from Antonio. You could imagine in the 70s that communication across the ocean, trying to find somebody, was not as easy as it is today. And Elizabeth set up a lot of roadblocks along the way. So he was not successful. And as far as characters go, there's Cecilia, Elizabeth's quirky friend who lives in Connecticut. And another important character is her brother protector, who kept her safe during her treacherous childhood.
It's fascinating to watch you weave the generations into one another and how one generation affects the next generation, almost like dominoes, that something that happened 2 or 3 generations before can reverberate through to the present time. Let me ask you a question, and you don't have to answer this. Is Is any of this personal experience? Are you drawing from any personal experience to make these characters so very lifelike?
As far as the characters go, not really. No. But as far as the locations go, yes, I am from Connecticut. I went to school in Boston and also studied in France. So that part was very easy to describe, and I think the reader will get a beautiful vision of some of those places.
Well, your writing is very lyrical. It to me is almost like a television scene with the description. You feel like you're just right there, walking the cobblestone streets of France, meeting Antonio, having these wonderful gourmet meals, which you describe to the point of someone feeling like, oh gosh, I've got to get up and get something to eat. So it's a very lyrical writing. Do you have a lot of background in this kind of writing?
I just love words mainly, and I have written poetry. Yes, and I think being a musician gives me a feeling for the way words fit together in a lyrical way, in a musical way, so that they aren't jarring.
Well, certainly the crossword puzzle background that you have, which I thought was very intriguing. Words have to fit into a crossword puzzle, and you can see the way you've put words into this narrative that really speaks to, I think, a lot of thought and care and some practice too, because it doesn't come to you, does it, that you can just make these words fit?
No, it takes a lot of work.
It does, and it shows. It shows. And so how had the book, it came out, when did it come out?
It came out in 2016.
Okay.
I had tried several book companies, and nobody was really interested in it, and now there are fewer and fewer, and I decided if I wanted to get it out, I had to do it myself. And so I did. Actually, I entered it into, when Amazon was starting its ebook arm, they requested some authors to send a manuscript, and they were offering a prize. So, of course, I entered. I got an award from Amazon. And on the strength of that, I thought, all right, I'm going to go with Amazon. This seems an easy way to do it, to get it out there, to market it. And that's what I did.
Now, we're obviously talking in Sarasota. Did you have any community support? Do you belong to any of the local authors groups, the clubs, anything like that? Or was this just something that you did yourself?
Just something I did myself.
So you had no guidance, no structure, no role model, just...
No, just a pile of rejection letters.
Oh.
Yeah, so I decided I'll do it myself.
Okay. And so you did, and then you got the book reviewed in a number of very well-respected places.
Yes.
How did that process happen? Did you submit?
You submit the manuscript to them, yes, and then they read it. They have special readers, and then they write up a review which you're able to use for whatever you like. So some of them are included in the book.
How do you find the people who are going to do the reviews? Is it just a Google search?
Yes.
Book reviewers?
Yes.
Independent book reviewers, I'd imagine?
Yes, although now Kirkus, one of the prime reviewers that anyone would like to have a review from, now reviews indie books, whereas they didn't before.
Okay. What kinds of reviews did you get?
I got glowing reviews. People, as you said, they commented a lot on the descriptions, the vivid descriptions, the flow of the story itself.
And so that's 2016.
Right.
Okay, and then how were things going? Did you feel happy with progress? Did you feel like you could move on to another project? What were your feelings after the book had been pushed out?
I was happy in the beginning. I was so thrilled to see it actually in print, to have a physical book to show somebody. And then I convinced a few friends to have a book party, a couple of them, and we had a good time doing that. And then I realized, well, I need to do more than this because the books are not going to sell themselves. And then I thought, I want to push it to the next level. I want to find someone to help me market it. And I did. And the first thing that was advised was for me to work with a professional editor and to really go through it with a fine-tooth comb.
And that's how you found me.
And that's how I found you, Liz. Yes, it was. I thought the product was pretty fine. Well, it was not fine at all. And it was certainly not ready for the big time.
So you had a strong story. So many people have a really strong and compelling, interesting, engaging story. And you decided to take it further.
Yes, I believe in the story, and people who have read it really like it. And I thought on the strength of that, perhaps I could push it to the next level and not just rely on Amazon sales.
When you saw, because I remember very vividly when we sat down for coffee, and I grabbed the copy that you'd brought, and I think the first thing I noticed, I said, Lucia, I noticed that you didn't credit an editor. And what did you say? Do you remember what you said? Because I do.
Yeah, I don't. Well, the truth was I didn't have an editor.
But
I edited it myself.
Well, there we go. You have a master's degree?
No.
Okay, no master's degree, but you have a college degree.
Oh, yes.
And as I did when I graduated from college, I don't have a master's degree, but you had gone over it to the extent that you could.
Yes.
And you did.
Yes.
And it looked nice, but I think the first thing I said was you didn't credit your editor, and you said, well, I was the editor.
Right.
And so I said, does anybody have a pen? And I said, can I write in your book? And you said, yes. And were you surprised?
Very surprised. Very surprised, because I had been over with a friend of mine, also lives in New York, and myself, and together we worked on it. I had feedback from some other friends who had picked up a thing or two, and I thought, well, this is great now. It's perfect. Well, far from it.
Well, I think one of the things that too few people understand and recognize is that when you're an editor, you really get into the weeds. You're dealing with minutia. You're dealing with the direction of quotation marks. And as I recall, one of the challenges initially with your book was that you had used, and people who don't write are not going to get this part, but there are directional quotation marks, and then there are non-directional quotation marks, and never the twain can meet in a single manuscript. So that was one of the things that I thought was immediately obvious to me, because that's the kind of thing that jumps out of the page and just hits me upside my head when I see non-directional and directional quotation marks together.
One of the reasons that happened was that in 1994, I started the book on an electric typewriter. Then when I realized, well, I think I'm going to be able to write this thing, I got myself a Star Writer word processor, which spits out a little floppy disk.
A floppy disk?
A floppy disk. And then I moved to computer, but the computer couldn't read the disk, and it was really questionable whether the project would go ahead. But it did, and we ended up with all kinds of problems.
Well, that's understandable with the two very different types of technology, the pre-computer and the post-computer technology. To try to marry those two, it wasn't surprising to me that we had various styles. And there were also lots of times when you had letters from different characters, and that requires a whole different formatting than the regular text. So that was another challenge to do. And there are
poems.
There are poems
from Rumi.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And Rumi is a real poet.
Yes, 13th century philosopher. And today he's very popular. If you Google him, it's Rumi, and he's very knowledgeable, and he helped move the story ahead with his words.
How did you discover him?
I always loved him. I had seen a program on PBS about him, and I just fell in love with him.
So you have Antonio, not Elizabeth, who introduces Rumi to the narrative.
Yes.
And
yes.
he has a little book of poems that she finds, and then they have that connection with the poetry. But the poetry certainly was another challenge, because that's a separate way to format, so that every time you change from text to conversation to letters to poetry, your reader gets a signal that, oh, change of pace. So that was another reason that your manuscript was especially complicated.
It was.
And describe the editing process. How did that happen?
Well, first we took the book itself as it was in all its faults and glory, and just went through and circled everything.
So there was a page by page?
Page by page by page, yes, and there is not one blank page in there. And Liz did that, and then she handed it back to me, and there were a few corrections, additions that maybe needed to be made too, which I did, and so we went back and I made a bunch of notes, and then we churned out a new manuscript. And then I got the manuscript to read again. And the same thing, went through every little word, every detail. There are also quite a few French words in there, but nothing that is going to throw anybody. And they all have their own accents. And so we had to be careful about those. So we got through the second edition, and I'm thinking, well, this has got to be it. No, we did a third one, and by now it's looking a little bit like Groundhog Day, because I'm reading this book over and over and over again. I still loved the book, which is a good sign.
Very good sign.
Yeah.
But wouldn't you think that at this point we should really have found everything? But it continued to manifest itself. And I liken this whole process to trying to find the trees for the forest, because you chop down a lot of the forest, but there's still trees standing, and you don't see those trees while the forest is intact.
True.
So you chop down the forest, you see the trees, you go back and get those, and all of a sudden you still have trees, because now you only see things that, because the forest has been decimated, the trees are decimated, now there's still some things to see that you didn't see before. Right. And so we went through 3 different discrete edits of the book. And every time we found, and every time you find more challenging things. The first edit, I know we found some things that were pretty obvious, but then they become less and less obvious and more important. Because how do you react when you get a book and you start reading and there's a typo?
Oh, I see them. It's funny, I think I see them easier in other people's books than my own. but I do see them, and if it's my book, which it usually is, I get out a pen. Because I might hand the book on to somebody else, and I just want to point out to them that, this isn't quite correct. But yeah, I do see them, and I think a lot of readers do, and I certainly didn't want readers to be reading my book and getting out a pen.
Because when I get out my pen and I make the first circle, all of a sudden I find that I've disconnected slightly from the narrative, because I have my pen, it's either in my hand or it's on the table next to my bed or wherever I'm reading, and then I start looking for the inevitable second mistake. And once an author allows his or her reader to disconnect from the book in that way, and the reader's actually keeping score, you begin to lose your reader. And frankly, people lose me at the second typo.
Yeah.
And if I feel like, gosh, if the author isn't careful enough, isn't a good enough steward of his or her book, then he or she's not a very good steward of my time, which I value. And the second typo, generally speaking, I'm out of there. But I agree with you, because I'm about to ship a box of books to a friend. And I wanted to write him a note ahead of time saying, I'm sorry if some of the books have circled words in them, because I just can't help myself.
I know it. And I don't want to do anything that's going to stop the reader, stop the reader's pleasure of enjoying the book by seeing something that shouldn't be there or that's incorrect. And I think also you lose your credibility when you make mistakes. The reader loses faith in you. So.
Absolutely. It's a trust thing.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. So here Lucia and I brought in the 3 iterations of the book, which I find the best process is to print the entire book out in a 3-hole punched paper and put it in a binder. And that way you actually have the book in a piece of paper where you can write notes and you go through it with a fine-tooth comb. Always helpful if your author will have his or her own copy and do it with you.
Right.
And then you see different things, and you do it once, you do it twice, and then you do it 3 times. And only then do you get your proof copy. Because your manuscript, with all the French words, all that italics that we had to decide, and I had to actually do research about how far the italics goes. If you have a phrase or a word in a sentence that it's in italics, what if it's the last group of words in a sentence? Is the end punctuation in italics? Right. So if they're quotation marks, are those in italics? When does the italic start? When does it stop? And that was really interesting and very challenging, because it has to do with the look and the feel and the fit and the finish of the book itself.
Right.
And how the text is positioned on the page is important, because your first book, I'm a very traditionalist in that I like my chapter starts to be on the recto side, the right-hand side. And so we made that happen with the second book. And we have the second book here. Tell us a little bit about the difference in the cover between the first edition and the second edition.
All right. Well, being a do-it-yourselfer, I chose the first cover. It was a generic cover. I didn't want to pay anybody to make a cover, or I didn't want to buy one that was from a separate group that cost money. So I bought this one thinking, I had my own view about what it represented, but obviously it didn't represent that. So when I got together with Liz, we chose a cover. First of all, the lettering is larger, and you can see it from the aisle in a bookstore without a magnifying glass.
Which is a good thing.
Yes.
Which is a good thing.
Right. And it says certainly a little bit more about what the story is about.
We have a woman who's looking out at the moon. The moon is over the water. Nice big font that's visible from a distance. And it's a very poetic cover, as opposed to, as you said, a kind of generic cover of a headless woman on the front. Now, the first novel, a novel about finding home, and you decided to take that out.
I think it was mutually agreed upon that we didn't need that.
Okay. Yeah. So to me, it really didn't add to the conversation. And in fact, distracted a little bit from this terrific title you have, I'll Be Looking at the Moon.
I'll Be Looking at the Moon is from my favorite World War II war song. It's about separation. It's the I'll Be Seeing You is the name of the song, and one of the lines is, I'll be looking at the moon, but I'll be seeing you. Of course, that adds to the romance of the story. But yeah, I love that.
Well, it's certainly night and day from the first book to the second book. And that, I think, is what's intriguing. One of the several things that's really intriguing about your story, Lucia, is so often authors seem to ignore the minutia, the editing, the need to be correct, the need to publish to basically New York standards. And for you to dig your heels in and kind of say, I'm not going to be that author, when the overwhelming impetus is to just let things go.
Yeah.
I really admired that. I admire it still. I was at a conference a couple weekends ago, and the keynote speaker kept telling the audience, done is better than perfect. And he had handouts that had typos and other mistakes in them. And everyone's nodding their heads like they're those little dogs you see in the back of people's cars, those little bobbing heads. Done is better than perfect. You can have perfect. You can have perfection with your book. And that is the standard. That's what people should be striving for. And for you to pivot so dramatically with your book is very admirable.
Well, thank you. It also takes a great editor to get me there.
Wow, that I appreciate. And we had a very good book designer, Gail Williams, a local woman, did the book cover and the back of the cover. So I thought it was a really good collaborative effort. So tell me what's in your future.
Well, I am working on a second book. It's nothing at all like the first. It's told from the viewpoint of a man.
Oh.
So we'll find out how that works. But so far I haven't found it difficult.
You want to share a little bit about the...
Yes, it's this man suffers a devastating tragedy. And the story is about how, if he does come back, how he does come back from it. And one of the main characters is an interesting man named Utah. He is, in this thing that happened to him, he became a bit disabled. He needed rehabilitation, and that was his therapist, but he was also a philosopher and a psychologist, and he finally realizes that this man needs more than he can give him, so he leads him to the giant leatherback sea turtles in Culebra. And together they watch these turtles lay the eggs at night on the beach. And it's allegorical at that point.
Wow. Well, did this experience give you any courage to push the boundaries of what you thought you could do, what Lucia Barrett, author, could do?
Yes. Yeah, and especially when people say, oh, you wrote a book. Oh, how did you ever do that? I can't imagine. I didn't think of that people would realize that it was so hard. And to have successfully put a book out there and published it and have it looking as beautiful as it does now certainly makes me feel pretty good.
That is great. Well, you are a real inspiration and a role model to other indie authors who are determined to put out quality products, and my hat is off to you.
Well, I hope so.
Thank you.
It can be done.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Lucia. Well, we are pretty much out of time today, and I would like to thank Manatee Educational Television for hosting Suncoast Authors TV. I would like to thank Lucia Barrett, author of I'll Be Looking at the Moon. And Lucia, where is your book available?
It's available on Amazon.
Okay.
It can be found in bookstores and libraries.
Okay, great.
And I also would like to say there is a video trailer of the book, and you can find that at my website, which is luciabarrettauthor.com.
luciabarrettauthor.com. Great. Thank you. Well, I appreciate you sharing this, your first experience with your first book. And I would like to thank Charles Clapsaddle for hosting Manatee Educational Television and his fine team here. And if you have any program ideas, feedback, or you would like to be featured on the show, I hope you'll contact me at lizcorson.com. Thank you very much for being here today.